Welcome to AA Beyond Belief, the podcast. This is episode 74, and I'm your host, John S. In today's episode, we meet Justin M., a co-founder of Quad A Canberra. Justin will share his story, and we'll talk a little bit about recovery as a secular person in AA. He'll also share some exciting news about a new podcast he's going to be producing, featuring stories of secular people in recovery. Without further ado, Justin M. from Quad A Canberra. Okay, Justin, hello. How you doing?
Hi, how you doing, John?
It's very nice to have you here. For I don't know how long, I've known you on Twitter. And,
yes, I do have a presence there.
And I always thought to myself, I really need to give this guy a call and do a podcast. And then now I know you on Facebook. So getting to know you better all the time. Maybe a good place to start is with your own story, if you would like to go into that. Your whole story with Alcoholics Anonymous, getting involved with secular AA and starting the group in Canberra, and we'll just kind of take it from there.
Yeah, excellent. No worries. I started drinking late in life. When I was young, I was a pretty straight-edge kind of person. I didn't drink or do drugs. But what I found later in life was that I got married, and I was in a very unhappy relationship in my marriage. And I didn't really know how to cope. So I turned to drinking as a way to cope. And very quickly, it's the classic story, a couple of drinks of wine at night became a bottle. After a little while, that became 2 bottles, and then the Black 8 started. Then it became a bottle of fortified wine, and then it was a bottle of wine and half a bottle of spirits. And then, it kind of, at the end, it was a bottle of spirits a night. So it was a pretty classic demise into pretty heavy drinking and blacking out over a 9-year period. We have a pretty good medical system here, so I was able to, towards the end, access a free counselling service. We also have free public hospitals in Australia, so I was able to, through my counsellor, set up a way to go to a centre for medical withdrawal, what we sort of colloquially known as a detox here in Australia. Unfortunately, my counsellor, although she was a lovely person, and I no longer see her because I've sort of, in the recovery process now. But she was a lovely person, but she's not a drinker herself, and she's certainly not an alcoholic. So she didn't quite understand the impacts of the words that she said to me. With a week to go before I booked into the detox, she said to me, "It's very important that you understand that you can't stop drinking." And I mean, I can guess that you know what I read into that, John, which was drink as much as you want.
Yeah.
So the last week was a bit of a nightmare, drinking 24/7. It's something I hadn't really done before. It ended up that I was admitted to the hospital, and I went through the process of having Valium and the withdrawal process, and it was not pretty. One of the nurses later described me as one of the worst that she'd seen on admission. Not something that I'm particularly proud of, but I like to mention because it really sets the scene of where I've come from as being a committed non-drinker to someone who used it as a very poor coping device.
Right.
When I couldn't cope with a bad marriage, and then someone who really spiraled out of control towards the end. But look, I was very lucky. On my 3rd day in the hospital, they took us out to a meeting of AA. That was a men's meeting here in Canberra. And look, I was asked to share, and I threw myself into it. I shared in my first meeting. I cried my eyes out because we were talking about we were asked to talk about some of the things that we were ashamed about, and I had a lot to be ashamed about. I cried. We had a break in the middle because it was an hour and a half meeting. And I had about 3 guys come up to me and just hug me. And it was something that I had missed for such a long time, that sense of love and compassion. We talk about love and tolerance in AA, but the feeling of like unconditional love and unconditional acceptance and compassion. These are guys who had shared, a similar history, or if it was not exactly the same, we share a sense of history. And, it was just total acceptance, So I was, I guess, hooked on my new obsession, which was AA, from my first meeting. I have to say I didn't get it straight away. I didn't really. I had a couple of relapses in there, but I didn't stop going to meetings, and I think that was the key thing for me. I would go away and think about things and think about the sense of calm and that acceptance and compassion and love that I felt at AA meetings, and I couldn't. I could deal with that, and I could. That really helped. But there was still that call to go back. And so I did. I relapsed a couple of times, and, I'm glad I did. I think it taught me a lot, and it's taught me now to extend that love and compassion to other people who do relapse,
right.
or people who, like I had a conversation this last week with someone who was sort of, trying to almost talk themselves out of recovery. They had a lot of excuses and a lot of ideas about why it wouldn't work for them. And it taught me that, I can extend that love and compassion I got for free to them, and understand that I talked myself out of it. But what didn't change was the love and compassion that I received at AA. So I was able to listen to them and listen to themselves, try to talk themselves out of it and go, okay, yeah, I understand. I did the same. And I think I ended the conversation by saying, look, I understand that it mightn't be for you, but don't forget we're not going anywhere. And it was that reminder of that, we're still here. You can always come back, and we'll always accept you back. There are some people I know in AA who feel a little bit of shame about coming back, but I've never seen anyone be shamed. I think I was never shamed. I quite on one occasion I had relapsed, and I came back to a meeting sober for 3 days that time, and I said, look, I'm now 3 days sober, and what people said was, well done.
Yep.
You made it back.
Absolutely.
And that's just amazing. So I think whatever sense of shame I had in my head was just in my head. And that really has taught me so many important life lessons about, that difference between how I perceive a situation and actually then just throwing myself into the situation and finding out what is actually true about it. So, yeah, it's something that I've learned a lot from, and I've really enjoyed. Having said that, it's not perfect. And I would like to see AA change in some ways. But look, that's not up to me. That's up to AA. And that's another thing I've learned, that, what I want from a situation is not always what I'm going to get, especially when it's a group situation.
So when you started going to meetings, were you going to, at that time, I guess they didn't have a secular AA meeting. Is that right?
Yeah, no, there was nothing.
Okay. So what happened that made you want to help start a secular AA meeting? Were you beginning to feel uncomfortable? And what was kind of your belief system when you were starting out, and how did you handle all the God stuff in AA?
That's a very good question, John. I'm again, I've been really lucky, and I think that's, probability taken personally. But anyway, I met a person who has really become a mentor for me in AA. His name is Chuck. He's from the US, originally from Boston, but had moved around, and he's been sober for more than 40 years in AA as an out atheist. And he was a real inspiration for me, and continues to be someone I, think of as a bit of an elder and a mentor, someone I can learn a lot from. And so I was struggling with the God part of the program. I remember after one meeting, a particularly religious person came up to me and asked me if I'd found Jesus.
Oh my God.
And that was, I have to say, it was not an easy situation to deal with. I think I mumbled something about being agnostic about the question and not really believing. But I realized it had put me in a situation where the love and tolerance and compassion that I'd felt from others would be difficult to return in that situation. Look, I'm pretty ardent when it comes to my disbelief, and in a everyday situation, I would have said something really silly like, maybe he's down the back of the couch. That's where the
Right,
is. When I lose it, something silly like that, or something offhand. But we're not dealing with a situation. I felt that I was allowed to be offhand. This is a person who is like me. I don't know what's going on in their head. If I say something flippant, is that enough for them to go and drink?
Good point.
So I think I mumbled something about, as I said, being agnostic about the question, and walked away.
Yeah.
And then I realized straight away, okay, this reciprocity that I'm trying to engender is going to be difficult if I'm always tiptoeing around other people's beliefs.
Right.
And I really wanted the kind of comfort and feeling of safety that a lot of people were describing that they found to AA, and I hadn't quite found that. So being, new in sobriety, I thought, well, I better go and test this idea and run it past a few of my elders, and I've talked to Chuck, and I talked to another very long-term agnostic, Shelley, in the program, and said, look, this is the problem I'm having. I'm very straight up, out as an atheist. I'm fairly ardent in my view about the best paths to truth and the most reliable methods for gaining knowledge about the world. So I'm having this difficulty, how do I deal with those who are godly without doing something silly, which may lead to them, relapsing or I wouldn't want to challenge someone in such a way that they lost their faith, because my feeling, at least, is if faith is getting you sober, well, good on you. That's fantastic.
Yeah, and you want AA to be a comfortable, safe place for everybody, So, yeah.
Yeah, so I ran it past those two people, and basically they said, oh, well, we've been thinking about starting up a non-religious meeting for a long time.
I'll be darned.
And their words were literally, well, we've been thinking about it, but we really want someone who has the time and effort to put some, to start it up and run with it. So with their encouragement and with their advice, I thought, well, I'll go ahead and do this. One of the best pieces of advice that I got actually was from someone who said, it's great to start a meeting, especially one which is in non-religious, but you have to ensure that you have a sort of continuity with it. So their advice was, talk to people who you find in the program who are atheist or agnostic or not certain or whatever. Talk to them and say, I'm thinking about starting this meeting. Are you willing to make a commitment to come along for 3 to 6 months? And the advice was, when you have half a dozen of those, then go ahead and start the meeting. So that's exactly what I did.
Oh, good. So you had a good number of people starting then.
Well, I figured, that's the advice that I got. And the more I thought about it, I thought, that's good. There's no point in starting a meeting which you're not going to have people attend. And then, of course, word of mouth is very, very useful in AA. And if there are people attending, they're going to meet other people that at meetings that I'm not at, and then they're going to, it's going to spread from there. So look, that's how it started. Great piece of advice, and really following the guidance of those who've been in the program much longer than I have. So we started up. That meeting is still running. We still meet. We're coming up on our second birthday.
Good.
It's runs on Friday in the city in Canberra at 6:30. I figured since that was going quite well that I might start another meeting. So that's I'm up to co-founding a second one.
Good.
That's on Saturday at noon in the southern part of Canberra, so a bit further away from the city.
Okay.
And both of them get good attendance. The Friday night is sort of in a bit of a difficult venue, so we get around 8 to 10 people, but the Saturday one we get regular attendance in the 12 to 14 people. So
that's a nice size meeting.
It's coming along well. So my concern, as I said, I've tried to fall back on the data, on the research. My concern with AA is that the data I've seen says that around about 20% of people drink at what would be considered dangerous levels, and that's fairly consistent over time.
Right.
I don't know the data about your bit of the world, John, but certainly in Australia, non-religion as an identity is definitely growing. Our last national census put non-religious or having no religion as being the biggest religious category.
Yeah, we're getting that way in the States, but we're still a pretty religious country. And I think the ones that identify as nuns probably still have some sort of a concept of a supernatural something out there. But probably not as secular as Australia, but we're getting there. And the younger. And as time goes on, we'll get more and more like that. So yeah, you're right. That's the demographics. That's where society is headed overall.
So for me, it's interesting. We have this baseline of people drinking at dangerous levels, but we have the non-religious rising. So my personal concern is, well, what happens to an organization like AA? My anecdotal evidence, which is not evidence, but my anecdotes are that I see people come in who are not religious and they leave very quickly.
Yeah.
In fact, there have been situations where I've had people that I've chased out of meetings because I know they're non-religious.
Yeah.
And they've said to me things like, I'm not going to hang around with that on the wall. Yeah. I don't do God. I want to get sober, but I'm not going to do it like this.
Yeah.
Which was another impetus to try and open a meeting and open more and really offer a kinder, gentler way.
Right.
Which seems, despite what, the big book says, we have very clear traditions and principles. And to me, it seems as though offering a way of getting to sobriety, which is wider and kinder, is the best way to go.
While the numbers of the non-religious are growing, AA has actually gotten a little more religious. For example, when you told me the story about the guy or whoever it was that asked you if you found Jesus, you would never hear that in AA back when I was starting in '88. Nobody would ever talk about a specific religious belief. They would talk about God for sure. They might even talk about being Catholic or whatever, but there was never, open talks of Jesus. Now though, what I hear is people bring the Bible to meetings and people talk about Jesus Christ. So, that's a bit different. And if I had heard that kind of talk when I was first coming around, and I was not a religious person, it would have scared me away too. So basically what's happening, I think, is as AA is becoming more religious in a sense because the only people who will tolerate it are those who can handle it. And so I think you're getting more and more of those more religious types of people in there. Anyway, that's my theory anyway.
Oh, absolutely. What really concerns me is that, we do have a primary purpose and we do have the third tradition, and both of them are very clear. You could call me somewhat of a fundamentalist, but I do go back to the primary sources when I ever have a conflict if I thought about AA. And to me, it's very clear that we do have a primary purpose and we do have tradition. And there are things which are reasonable to talk about in AA, and there are things which are outside issues.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying God is an outside issue, but I'm saying our third tradition is clear. Our primary purpose is clear.
Right.
There are... for me, there's a degree of cognitive dissonance when I go back and I understand that. But then I say, okay, but we have, for example, 7 billion people in the world, and we know that rates of drinking are around the 20% at dangerous levels. So my quick, back of an envelope calculation is we should have about 1.4 billion members. That's not what we have. No. We have around about 2 million.
Right.
So there's something going on there, and I don't know what it is. But for me, I guess the real benefit of meetings which are non-religious or secular, however you want to term them, is that if people share in that context, everyone can get it.
Yeah.
Everyone gets the message.
Right.
My personal problem is that if I'm in a meeting and someone is sharing in a religious way, I tend to shut down.
Right.
I still have that. I'm early on, and that's okay. But I do have that problem that I find it hard to sift through for the gold. in their share. I'm sure there's great little nuggets of gold and useful stuff, but I do have this tendency to shut down. So I'm figuring with my shares, I occasionally mention that I'm an atheist, only so that others who feel the same or are the same know that it's okay to be out.
Yeah.
But most of this, it'll be in passing. It'll be, I'm an atheist, so I don't think God is going to do this. However, I've found techniques A, B, and C to be fantastic. So I try to keep the message non-religious as possible, with throwing in the occasional mention of being a non-believer.
Yeah, I was doing that. It gets a little tiring though, because I was kind of dancing around things when I came out as an atheist fairly gradually at my home group, and what I would do is I would be honest with how I was sharing, but I would be very careful with how I couched the words. But I would try to focus on actions and so forth. But every once in a while, some topic would come up where there was just no avoiding it, and like you say too, just trying to sift through what everyone else was saying. It was really wearing on me, and I was feeling more and more distant from the rest of the group. And that's kind of why I helped start our meeting here, is because it's just becoming too difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've found that the good thing about the two non-religious meetings here in Canberra is that we have that sharing which everyone can enjoy. And we do often have visitors who are religious who come along for a couple of meetings, and it's really interesting because we've had quite a number who are religious, but they've come along to find out what we're all about, and they've stuck around.
That's cool. So
I'm getting that feedback that, what we're doing kind of, works for everyone. And for me, that's fantastic, because that's our primary purpose, is helping alcoholics get sober.
So what's the format of your meeting? What's the format?
So the Friday night one is we read Living Sober, which I find to be a very practical, nice little text. And then the Saturday one is a steps meeting. I think that was, so both of the decisions about the format was a group conscience decision in both cases. I do like both the decisions. I think it's very important to talk about the steps. And so,
how do you guys go about that? Do you use any particular literature to discuss the steps?
No. So it's again, it's relying on the older sober members. So the Saturday meeting reads the step as it appears in the book. That's important. It's a historical document. And then we get an older sober member to share on how they've done the step or approached the step. And then everyone in the group gets a chance to share their thoughts and feelings about the step, whether they've actually done it or not. And it seems to work very well. We're up to step 8 at the moment, because it's only been running for about 2 and a bit months. But it seems to work quite well. The plan that the group has come up with is that we may transition to another document at some point if we feel like we've done enough work on the steps. But, I think it's important to spend that time to work out, how are people making sense of the steps in their life, from where they're coming from. Yeah.
I think it's important. It's good to have that structure. It's good to have a process to go through. I found that most people who show up at an AA meeting are kind of expecting it, whether they've had experience with AA or not. And a lot of times one of the questions that we get asked is, how do you guys work the steps, as non-believers? So I think it's a good idea. We do step meetings. We have officially once a month we have a step meeting. And we have we have 5 meetings a week at our group, and then 2 meetings a week at the other group. But so one of those meetings out of the month, is a step meeting. But we'll talk about them occasionally, more than that. But what we do, and this is probably because of the habit from my old group, and maybe other groups like that are around here. They really rely on reading things, and I grew up in a group that was reading the Big Book all the time. So anyway, we usually read from some sort of a book, and so we're reading not AA literature, but we will read a secular version of the steps. and a secular, put it this way, a secular interpretation of the steps is what we do. We have the originals hanging on the wall, but we'll read a book about, like the alternatives 12-step books or something like that.
Absolutely.
Anyway, that's what we do.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, that's fantastic. Look, I think from my point of view, the steps are important, and in a way we can't help but interpret them. Every individual interprets them.
Everyone,
in whatever way they
not.
see fit. Absolutely. Yeah, so I think that's very important, and but that's what the group decided, but I personally like it, and we do get a lot of people who are not necessarily non-religious at that meeting, so it really seems to have hit a sweet spot in that it's not steps meetings are not common here in Canberra.
Okay.
I think we may be one of the few. There are a few other ones, but it's one of the few. So it seems to have hit a nice crowd, which is good. Because that's what, for me, it's all about. It's about carrying that message.
Yep.
And making it accessible. I like to think of my particular role as helping to widen that broad highway we talk about, because while the highway is broad, the edges are pretty steep, If we fall off it, we tend to fall a long way.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah. So the broader we can make it, the safer it is for everyone.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that's what we're doing too. I mean, I see that at our group. We get a pretty diverse crowd. We don't get as many believers now. We did when we very first started, though. We had quite a few believers. Not so much anymore. I think they just kind of got tired of it.
It's interesting. The very first one of the Friday meeting we had, it was a sort of coming out as atheist story meeting rather than a recovery meeting.
Yeah.
And that kind of worried me at first, but that was one meeting. And the second meeting, we were straight back to recovery.
Yeah.
So because that's what we recognize we're all about. So
yeah, very typical too. I mean, even our group went through that, and it will come again in waves as people come in. But you'll have, we'll have people that have had a bad experience in AA, and they may have been in AA for a long time, and then all of a sudden, they come out as an atheist and they're given hell. And then they find the secular AA meeting, and it's a place for them to vent, or to at least express feelings that they've never been able to express for a long time. It's been pent up inside them. And I think they have to get it out. And then after they get it out, they're kind of done with it. And then they can get on with their, their program or whatever. But yeah, I sometimes I'll cringe. If I walk into one of those meetings where someone is angry about God or angry about AA or whatever, but those will happen from time to time. And I just always will tell people too, don't judge AA or even an AA group by one particular meeting or by what you hear one person say at a meeting. Because anybody can say whatever they want for their time to talk, Oh,
absolutely. I personally I try to keep a very open mind about these things, and I still go to what I guess you could call traditional meetings, and I try to get to as many different ones as possible, because I do hear different things, and I hear really useful things, and it's also good to be seen. So. Yeah. I like to think that there's certainly room in AA for more traditional, at least what has come to be known as traditional meetings and non-religious meetings. So I'm hoping there's enough room for both of those. My personal feeling is that the kind of meetings that we have here in Canberra, at least, seem to be closer to what you were talking about AA was previously like. They're closer to, talking about just the core principles and the core traditions of AA.
It was funny when at my very first group that I went to, the Downtown Nooners group, and this was back in 1988, and AA was kind of getting kind of conservative at that time, but they almost kind of tiptoed around the God stuff a little bit, and they went out of their way to tell me, oh, don't you worry, whatever you want to believe, and it wasn't that pushy. But then like a couple of years down the road, as I got involved in this other group, then it got a little bit more particular as we were really focusing on the big book, and really that group was really taking a pretty literal and strict interpretation of the big book too. And it seemed like the more that they studied that book, and I guess I should say we, because I was with them doing it, the more that we thought that we had to follow it precisely. And so AA was becoming, at least in my experience, was becoming a little bit more rigid, I guess, in that sense. And then, but I was okay with it. It was keeping me sober for a good long time. And it really wasn't until, it was many decades later when I came to realize I was an atheist that it ever became a problem. Before that, I just kind of took it as that's the way it is.
It is interesting, John, that some people use, and I've seen it personally. Some people use the Big Book as a way of promoting their own religiosity. I personally like to think of the Big Book as more of a Swiss Army knife. There are bits in it that you can use to be godly, but there are some really good bits which I can use as an atheist to understand my own sobriety and strengthen my own sobriety. So I like to think of it as useful. And once again, I go back to the actual
document too, right?
Oh, absolutely.
That's where we got it from. Yeah. So it is good. It's important to know, I think. And that's one shortcoming of our group. We don't read the Big Book at all. And I think part of that is my fault because I just got burned out on the damn Big Book. I'm telling you, I read it for a long time. And so we don't read it at all. And we got a lot of newcomers to our group who, some of them, I remember one woman said, "What's a Big Book?" They don't even know. They don't know anything about the Big Book. Anyway.
I do like to encourage people to go back to it though, because if you read it carefully, I think it's actually it's in not always, but in many parts it's very well written.
Yeah.
And I find in meetings where people quote it, they actually tend to misquote it. I mean, I wish I had $1 for every time I heard the three pertinent ideas, and the second one being quoted as, no human power could make me sober. And I think every time, hang on, it says, probably no human power.
Right.
Now, that's a very different thing. The probably, and I do occasionally share on this, that probably is a word I like to focus on, and I like to test that word. Because from my point of view, it's all human power.
Me too, exactly.
If you look at the history of it was, Bob was in a hotel, Bill was in a hotel, and he wanted to go and have a drink. But what did he do instead? He sought out other humans.
Right.
So that's human power. They set up AA together. That's human power. They spread the message. That's human power. And when I'm in a meeting, I make the point of saying, I'm in a meeting set up by humans.
Right.
That's human power. Run by humans. That's human power. Right. With humans sharing and humans listening. It gets, I like to reiterate that it's all human power, because I'll finish with saying that's all human. None of that is supernatural. And for me, that's the key point. That probably is so important, because I test that. And for me, when I do, all I see is humans helping other humans and doing it the best they can. And that's awesome. I mean, that
I had
makes
that experience at my
fantastic
group.
Organization.
Yeah, I was kind of like Custer at the Little Bighorn, though. I came out at my group and I said, human power is all I got. And God damn it, right after that, every single damn person was just, hitting me with, no, you got to have something more. It says right here, so, and that's when I realized, this I need to do something else. So, but that's the one thing where I divide with, if I say that out loud at a traditional meeting, a lot of people just won't accept that around here anyway.
Oh, look, it's okay. It's okay though. Look, I think for me, it's important to carry that message. And that's why if I share on that kind of message, I make it very clear, maybe to the point of being boring, that the evidence says that it's human power.
Yeah, true.
For me, there's no evidence that anything else is happening. So why won't you go with the evidence? I mean, it seems obvious to me, but look, I've had the very similar experiences. I've had lots of chats after meetings and people wanting to set me straight on various issues, and that's okay. I don't mind, because look, if it's working for them and they're sober, well, 100% congratulations to you. Yeah. You're doing what you need to do. But I don't work that way, and I sometimes flippantly make the point after meetings, never from the floor, that if God made the universe, including all humans, your God made me, and he made me an atheist. Mm-hmm. So he must have a reason.
Yeah.
So who am I to question? I mean, it's presented. I
Yeah.
try to present it gently, and it's a joke. But of
Yeah.
course, there's a reasonable point behind that.
Sure.
That if this is what you believe, you've got to make sense of me as part of your worldview, and how do you do that? I don't know, but it's a great challenge.
Yeah.
I enjoy it.
Yeah, I do too. Although I don't really go to other meetings other than my secular ones, I am very involved with AA overall, through our district and our area, and I work at our central office. And so I do have interaction with a lot of other AA people outside of, my secular group. I just don't go to their meetings, but I do a lot of other stuff with them, and I love it. And I love the people. So. Well, I was going to ask you, you're talking about starting a podcast, which I think is interesting. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Oh, yeah, sure. Look, it's just an idea out there that I've had. It's again something that I ran by some older sober members to say. There seems to be a lot of resources out there for people who are religious, but there are very few. And at this point, I have to thank you, John, for your service in terms of your podcast and what you've done. It's a fantastic service. I've listened to your podcast from episode 1 and enjoyed it greatly. In particular, I really enjoy those episodes where you have someone like you had in episode 72 talking about the science behind what is happening
she's
with
great.
addiction
Yeah,
and
that was
recovery.
fun. Yeah, I like her a lot.
I have to say, if anything's got me sober, it was understanding the science and in particular the way, our brains work when we're in addiction. I read William Porter's book and I literally put it down. I read the last half of it in one sitting, put it down and went, oh, wow, okay, that's it. I'm done. I can never drink again.
That was one of my favorite books I've read. Yeah. I like him a lot. He's like you too, and I agree with him. He really believes that understanding it is like 90% of recovery, is just understanding what the problem is. And he goes through great lengths in describing, why we become and how we become addicted to alcohol. And he's such a great guy. He helps a lot of people. He's got a really nice website. He writes really well. Just does some really good work.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I put down his book and literally had a moment of thought, okay, I understand now. Mm-hmm. And now I'm quite at ease. I'm at peace with the idea of never drinking again.
Yeah.
And that's something that I had struggled with in AA and I thought would never come. So gratitude to you for having, interviewed him and for him for writing the book is really enormous. So, yeah. That's the idea is to continue the work that others have done, I guess. I really rely on the older sober members that I've known. And, if I've learned anything, it's been from talking to them. And, it's the old saying, if I've seen further, it's because I stood on the shoulders of giants. And that's what I'm doing within AA. But I personally feel an obligation to carry that forward.
Yeah.
And hence the idea of putting something out there, putting out a resource that will be accessible to people across the world for free.
It's amazing, and I encourage you to do it. You will love it. I have never had an experience like this in my life doing this podcast. It has been one of the most, if not the most rewarding things I've ever done in Alcoholics Anonymous. I think the two most rewarding things I've ever done was helping to start my group and this podcast. But this podcast has, I just can't even describe it, Justin, but it has just totally transformed me. It's opened up the whole world to me. And I learn from every single guest, and the feedback that I get from people and how much it means to them to hear their own story, through someone else for the first time. It's just an amazing experience. So I totally encourage you. It's good for you. It's good for the listener. It's just a good, it's service is what it is. And it's fun too.
Yeah. So. For me, again, I go back to the origins of AA. And for me, those three principles, that underlie us of unity, service and recovery are what I go back to. And unity is what drives my desire to to spread the message and keep it, in a way which everyone can understand. And service, is a big thing in my recovery too. So I really feel that if I can pass on the message that I received free to others, and if it helps them in any way, that will have been a life well lived. So
Yeah.
I'm very happy to have found AA for only those reasons.
And I tell you, I kind of think that us secularists, for whatever reason, are pretty good with technology, but maybe better than some of the other AAs. I don't know why. So I'd love to see these podcasts come up because we've got Rebellion Dogs. He does a secular, Josie does secular AA podcasts. Me and now you. And I know that there's going to be more coming on board. And then when you go to YouTube, man, we've got like tons and tons of audio stuff out there on YouTube now. It's just like there's a lot of good information for anyone who's an agnostic or an atheist and who thinks that AA might not be for them. They can just Google is their friend and they will find AA Agnostica, AA Beyond Belief, Rebellion Dogs, the podcast. So it's putting that stuff out there is really important. And the podcasts are so cool because they stay out there as a library and people discover them over time. And it's just,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I have to say I literally carry with me USB storage devices to every meeting I go with Rebellion Dogs and your podcast on. And if anyone says to me, I really want to get the program, but I don't get the religion, I pull out a USB and go, there you go. There's 100 hours worth of recovery for free. Have it. And they usually say, are you serious? Like you're giving me this device. I said, yep. If you listen to it, that's fine. If you don't, that's fine. If you use it as a device to store your own data, that's good because you'll remember where it comes from. And that's passing that message on.
That's a good idea, actually. But, I listening to Joe's podcast, actually, he taught me how to be an atheist in AA, or at least how to be myself, my own true self in AA. And he also encouraged me through his podcast, without even talking to me directly, to get involved with service in Alcoholics Anonymous. So those podcasts really made a big difference in my life. So yeah, and then then doing one too. So yeah, it's great. So do you know what kind of format you're thinking about doing? You have any ideas?
Oh, so I was just thinking, interview at the moment, and the advice that I've got from other podcasters is that you want to probably get about 5 episodes in the can.
Okay.
Test those and then see how you go from there. So I'm lucky enough that I've got a conference called Skepticon coming up, and pretty much my 2 favorite podcasts will be in attendance. And so I'm going to try and hit them up for any further advice or hints. And I'll ask you the same at some point, probably, John. That would be great.
Yeah, that's a good idea. That's one thing that I had fallen short on, as there's kind of like a podcasting community of people that will talk to each other and share ideas and stuff. And I have never really reached out to any other podcasters other than Joe. And he's been very helpful from time to time. I would ask him questions like if I have somebody I'm nervous about interviewing or whatever. But yeah, I think that's a great resource. I do now, though, belong to a Facebook group for podcasters that I actually read the posts there and get ideas and so forth. And it has been helpful. So.
Yep, I'm thinking the same thing. Just interviews, essentially longer length sort of shares from people, just for the moment, if only because I do hear people saying that you'll know Joe and Charlie and their work, and a lot of people in meetings identify that's been very useful for them. So I'd like to just have at least a resource of similar kinds of stuff. This is a share or some information on traditions, steps, whatever it may be, from people who are not religious, and here's how they found a way to make the program work for them. So something like that.
A lot of power in stories. And one experience I have had from doing this podcast is listening to people's stories and becoming a better listener and valuing those stories and valuing those experiences so much and really getting to know the person from those stories. That's something so cool about when you do a podcast. When you're done with it, then you have to do the editing. And so you listen to that conversation, a little more slowly, a little more carefully. And so, over time, doing all of these, I have them all memorized in my head, all these people's stories. you know, and I feel like in a way they're kind of like friends, you know, so it's kind of cool. It's a neat experience.
Excellent. Well, I mean, if nothing else, that gives you a good resource to rely on for your own sobriety.
Absolutely.
It's clear that, at least to me, that, I need to be reminded of where I've been on a regular basis, so I know the reasons why I don't want to ever go back there.
And, I think that it sounds to me like Australia is kind of a booming area for secular AA. I mean, we've got now, you got a number of groups now in Sydney and Melbourne and Canberra, right? Are the places you've got them?
Yes, absolutely. As far as I know, I had a bit of a shock when you were, I think it was episode 69 I was listening to, and was it Jacinta? I'm not sure. Patrina, yes, thank you, from Sydney, and she gave a shout out to say that there were now 2 meetings in Canberra, and I thought, how did she know that?
Yeah.
And I thought, of course, because it's out there on the web,
Right.
and as you said, we do seem particularly good at spreading the message via that medium. So yeah, look. As far as I know, I haven't checked for a while, but there are at least 2 meetings in Sydney, an NA and an AA meeting in Melbourne. Obviously, the 2 in Canberra I'm involved with. So it's getting out there. We're growing, and it's all for the good as far as I'm concerned, because it's the kind of message that we spread is one which is digestible for everyone, which is what for me makes it great.
Well, I guess it's are you getting ready to get to your meeting?
I am, yeah, absolutely. I don't want to keep you too much longer. No. I would love to keep chatting to you, but you're home from work, and I've got things to do. So, and now we're contacted on Facebook, so connected, I should say. So, yeah, absolutely.
Well, I absolutely have enjoyed this. Thank you very much. I really look forward to your podcast when it's coming out. That will be a lot of fun to have a connection like that. So good luck with that. And anything I can do to help you, I'm very, very happy to do. I'm very excited about that. So that's really cool.
All right. Look, I'll leave it there. Thank you for everything. And I have to say thank you for your service. Your podcast has been a very big part of my recovery. So thank you for everything you do.
Well, that's it for another episode, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. I'm grateful for your support. Nothing does more for my recovery than this podcast, and I just really am grateful to you for the opportunity to do this. Hey, if you can think about it, if you like what you hear here, please leave us a review on iTunes. If you don't like what you hear, let us know. Maybe we can make a change. Also, if you're looking for support and friends, we have a secret Facebook group that you can join. So if you're interested, send me an email at john@aabeyondbelief.org. That's john@aabeyondbelief.org.